All right, so if you've got your lab atlas with you, let's pull that baby out. We're going to do a little bit of labeling, and then we'll finish up chapter 5 on the body tissues. Okay, so grab your atlas out, open it up, and you'll start to see slides of different body tissues. And so we're going to go through some of these slides here, help you kind of refresh, dial our brains down just a little bit before I present new material to you. The remaining amount of material for chapter 5 for the tissues for lab, there's not that much. So, all right, so this slide here, you're looking at simple squamous epithelial tissue. Simple squamous, remember, it is one cell layer thick. The cells are going to look flattened, tile-like, or like a fried egg. And the nucleus will also look kind of flat. All right, so the best way for me to describe it is going to be like a fried egg, personally. So we're going to see this type of tissue, all right, in places where filtration, absorption, and secretion are important. So because it's simple squamous, we'll see it around the alveoli, the air sacs. We'll also see it, all right, the lining. And if you're not familiar with the term lumen, the lumen is if the inside opening or space or cavity in a blood vessel. So I'm going to do my best to not mess this up. Okay, so here's a blood vessel or a lymphatic vessel. And the lumen is the space right here where the blood goes. That's the lumen. Well, anyways, the walls of that lumen, all right, the lining of that blood vessel is lined with simple squamous epithelium. And so that includes both blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. So we give it a special name. So you need to be familiar with this name here, endothelium. And then we'll also see this type of tissue in the serous membranes of our body cavities. We learned all about that back in chapter 1, like the pericardium, okay, or the visceral peritoneum, the parietal peritoneum, the parietal visceral pleura. Okay, so when we are learning these body cavities, or these serous membranes that line the body cavities, that is going to be made up of simple squamous epithelium, right? Also named, we call it mesothelium. You may have heard of the term mesothelioma, okay? That is cancer of the lining of the lungs there, right? Or a serous membrane, so we call it mesothelioma. Okay, the next type of simple epithelium is simple cuboidal. Great pictures here to really see what we're looking at. You can see it's one cell layer thick, this black line here. All right, that's the basement membrane. Okay, remember, all epithelium sits on top of the basement membrane. If it's simple epithelium, all the cells make contact with the basement membrane. If it's stratified epithelium, only the bottom layer. So you can see the cuboidal cells are as tall as they are wide, so they look like a square. And then the nuclei is usually going to be in the middle of the cell, and it's nice and rounded, spherical. Simple cuboidal. So we'll see this type of epithelium with glands, okay? So we'll see it lining the thyroid gland. We'll see it also in the kidney tubules. So that duct system of the kidneys when you're making urine. We'll also see it in the ovary here. And most of we now know what the secretory region is of glands. Okay, that's that bottom portion of the gland. That's going to make the secretions. So these secretory regions of the glands are going to be simple cuboidal epithelium. All right, now we're moving on to columnar epithelium. This is simple columnar epithelium. And this is referred to as non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium. Now, I've got an issue with the atlas here, but we're going to go along with it for right now, okay? Because we are limited to the slides that we were allowed to use in the atlas. It has to do with copyright and all this other stuff. Okay, so we get what we get. Okay, so this is non-ciliated columnar epithelium. So we're going to see this epithelium. All right, a lot of it's going to be in the digestive tract. So pretty much all the way from the stomach to the anus, you are going to see the lining of the digestive tract is going to be made up of non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium, one cell layer thick. So let's identify some of the things that we see in this picture. There's a goblet cell. Its nucleus is way down here. Goblet cell, goblet cell. Nucleus is down here. Okay, this is columnar epithelium because, well, obviously the cells are taller than they are wide, but we also said that the nucleus is going to appear oval, and it sits at the basal region of the cell near the bottom here. Here's the microvilli, this little brush border right here. That's the microvilli. So that's non-ciliated columnar epithelium. Oh, wait, there's some cilia. Okay, so this is one of the things that I have an issue with these slides, because what did I just do? I showed you this slide and it's titled non-ciliated columnar epithelium. How the heck does it have cilia on it? All right, you can barely see it. You're absolutely right. Alexis, you can barely see that brush border. But for the purposes of this slide here, this will be the cilia, okay? Right here. So if you get this slide and it asks you to name the slide, you can write in just simple columnar epithelium. You don't have to include the term non-ciliated for our purposes here. I've never done this before for this class. Never told the students to do that before, but there's always confusion. So I'm trying something new this semester so people aren't confused. This stuff is confusing enough. All right. This dotted line here, all right, that dashed line, there you go. That's the basement membrane. Remember, this is brown coloration down here. That's the basement membrane. Okay, so this is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. If it's non-keratinized, that means that it is living tissue. Keratin kills. So these cells don't produce keratin. Okay, so you can see here are the nuclei. And these cells here and here and here and here. Okay, so you can see nuclei all the way in some of these cells at the top. So if you see nuclei in all these cells up here, then it's understood that all these cells below it are alive. So you're going to see non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium in areas where there is moisture, like your mouth, your throat, the esophagus, the vagina, and the anus. So like I said in class before, entrances and exits to your body. And stratified epithelium, you're going to see in areas where the mechanical stresses are significant. Here's that transformer epithelium, transitional epithelial tissue. Okay, you can see it's nice rounded here at the top. This is an empty bladder. But one of the other qualities that we said about transitional epithelium is that there's two nuclei inside of a cell. So you can see a lot of these cells will have two nuclei here, all right, two nuclei here. Okay, so they're all over the place. Here's another one, here's another one. Okay, two nuclei, transitional epithelium. We're going to see in the urinary tract. This comes from the urinary bladder here. Now, if the bladder was full, all of this epithelium would be flat. It'd be smooshed down, like it would look kind of like what you see down here. Okay, this type of epithelium is called pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So if you look here at the picture, you can see, oh, there's a nucleus here, there's a nucleus down here, there's a nucleus here and down here and all over the place. All right, so it looks like there's several layers here, but it's not, okay? This is only one cell layer thick. All of the cells make contact with the basement membrane down here. Not all of the cells make it to the top. And this is cilia up here at the top. This is not a very magnified view, okay? In fact, the magnification for this slide is, it's very low. So here's the cilia. You can see where the arrow is pointing to. There's the cilia on top of the cells. You can see a goblet cell. Here's another goblet cell. Here's another goblet cell. So it's ciliated. It's going to be making mucus. So we're going to see this type of epithelium in our respiratory tract, lining the nasal cavity where your nose is. All right. The upper portions of your pharynx, that's the upper portions of your throat, the larynx, which is your voice box, trachea, bronchi. Okay. It's going to line the large airways. The large airways. I don't have a picture of the non-ciliated type, the pseudostratified, but you should know where that is in the epididymis. That's that little comma-shaped structure that sits on top of the male testicle, and then part of the male urethra. There's 3 parts to the male urethra. All right, so this is going to be inside the male urethra there. This epithelium, now if you look at it really close, it almost looks like it's simple cuboidal. Okay, so this dark pink line, that's the basement membrane. If you look, these cells look as tall as they are wide. We'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, you got a nice spherical nuclei at the center. But if you look closer, you can see here on the inside of this space here, this is called colloid. Okay, it's a protein substance. This is actually thyroid epithelium. So we refer to it as glandular epithelium because it's producing something. But if you, on the test, if you were to call it simple cuboidal epithelium, I wouldn't take off. Either or is appropriate for this slide only. Call it glandular epithelium, or you can call it simple cuboidal epithelium. All right, so like I said, this came from the thyroid here. So you're going to see this type of epithelium, all right, in our glands. Here's a stratified cuboidal epithelium. So this is a great example of a cuboidal cell. Okay, but you notice that the nuclei, these dark dots here, these are the nuclei. And so you'll see some of these cells on top of one another. So the shape of these cells is cuboidal, and there's more than one layer. So it is stratified cuboidal epithelium. And so you're going to see this in our sweat glands and our salivary glands, okay? Remember our exocrine glands? We talked about what the exocrine glands are. They're glands with ducts. So you're going to see, all right, this type of epithelium surrounding the lumen of the ducts. Helps to protect it, helps to give support, all right, to the ducts so they don't collapse. Here is our non-ciliated stratified columnar epithelium. Now, here's one of the things that I tell folks. Columnar epithelium, okay, the cells are longer than they are wide. So, and most of the time, okay, our nuclei for columnar epithelium sits at the bottom of the cell. So if you notice, there's quite a bit of space between this nuclei and the one below it here. We have all this space here. If you go back to this slide, there's hardly any space in between these two nuclei that are stacked on top of one another. Well, that's because that's how I know that that is cuboidal epithelium. If you look at my horrible drawing here, okay, we're going to just stack two cuboidal cells on one another. Here's the nuclei. Here's the nuclei. Now, I'm going to stack two columnar epithelial cells on one another. You kind of see the difference now and what I'm referring to. Okay, you can see that there's much more space between these two and these two. So you can say, oh, you look at this and like, well, that looks stacked on top of one another. This is if you're absolutely not sure. Well, good chance it's a cuboidal cell. And so if you see two, or if you see multiple nuclei stacked on top of one another, then you can say, okay, that's most likely stratified epithelium, stratified cuboidal epithelium. Then when we get to the columnar, you can see there's a lot of space. There's a lot of space from here to here. And there's a lot of space from this part of the nuclei down to the next nuclei. So if you see a lot of space in between these rows, it's most likely going to be columnar epithelium. Okay, this is one of those rare types of epithelium. All right, so we'll see this again in large sweat gland ducts and in parts of the male urethra. Okay, that's it for epithelial tissue. Let's get into our connective tissue. And if you recall, there's three types of connective tissue. Just to review. The first type is connective tissue proper. And then the second type is supporting connective tissue. And the third type is fluid connective tissue. So we're going to look at connective tissue proper now. So looking at connective tissue proper, we have two subdivisions of connective tissue proper, loose and dense. Both loose and dense have three types of connective tissue. This is the first type of loose connective tissue, areolar connective tissue. So you can see there's collagen fibers. That's this big thick guy here. Then we'll also see, here's a nice elastic fiber. It's kind of like a spring. You have some reticular fiber scattered around, some cells, okay? But you have a lot of ground substance here. The cells aren't really touching each other. Loose connective tissue, they barely touch each other. Okay, you don't have a lot of protein fibers, but you have a lot of ground substance. So there's our collagen fiber. It's the biggest of the three types of protein fibers. Protein fibers, three types: collagen, reticular, elastic. Know those. Collagen, reticular, elastic. Collagen is the strongest and largest. It does not branch. Here's an elastic fiber. You see it kind of is a little bit squiggly. It's not straight. It's the smallest, but obviously it has the ability to stretch and recoil. So where we're going to see this, we're going to see this in the deeper layer of the skin called the papillary layer of the dermis, and also in the subcutaneous layer. Subcutaneous layer is this layer right underneath our skin. So our loose connective tissue, don't forget, it is also considered to be the body's packing material. So we're going to see it, all right, scattered throughout our body. The second type of loose connective tissue is adipose connective tissue. And this picture is showing you adipocytes. That's this cell right here. And so there's stored lipids all inside. And the nucleus of the cell is here. It's pushed up against the edge of the cell because it's filled with lipids. Okay, here's the adipocyte. And so you'll see this in the subcutaneous layer. And also, we'll see its surrounding organs, because adipose fats, they have a couple functions: energy storage, cushioning, insulation. So it has protective functions there. All right, and then the third type of loose connective tissue is the reticular connective tissue. And you can see there's all these little compartments all over the place. Compartment, compartment, compartment. Okay, so these black lines here, that's going to be your reticular fibers. And so you'll see this type of tissue in lymphatic structures and organs. The spleen is a lymphatic tissue, or actually organ, excuse me. So you're going to see a lot of reticular tissue inside of the spleen. Okay, we haven't talked about the thymus, but that is a lymphatic gland that sits right above the heart. That's where your T lymphocytes go to mature. Okay, liver, lymphatic nodes, bone marrow, all throughout that. Makes those little compartments there, which we call stroma. All right, so the other type of connective tissue proper is dense connective tissue. And so there's three types of dense connective tissue. The first is dense regular connective tissue. This is the lasagna noodle one that we talked about. So you can see here's the nucleus of the fibroblasts. And so in between all these areas here, you can see this is all collagen, all this kind of, I don't know, peach colored or orange colored. All these are collagen fibers, and they're laid down parallel to one another, and they're tightly packed. Very little ground substance in this material. But this type of connective tissue is very strong. Remember, this is the one that can resist stresses very well in one direction. So you're going to see dense regular connective tissue in ligaments and in tendons. Ligaments and tendons. The second type of dense connective tissue is dense irregular connective tissue. Now the collagen looks more, it appears more clumped or in these swirl-like patterns here, but all this pink is the collagen. Here are the fibroblasts that produce the collagen. A little bit more ground substance here. See a little bit more white, okay? So dense irregular connective tissue will have a little bit more of a blood supply, okay? So it'll have a little bit more vascularity. Dense regular is very few blood vessels. So for this connective tissue, we're going to also see it in the deeper layer of your skin. And this is the one that makes up those kidneys that, not the kidneys, excuse me, makes up the capsules that surround a lot of your internal organs, the spleen, kidneys, liver, all right, because it's pretty tough tissue. We'll also see it surrounding your bones, your cartilage, okay? It offers a protective layer to those organs. And then the last type of dense connective tissue is elastic connective tissue. Right? The elastic connective tissue is mainly made up of elastic fibers that are also densely packed. So here's an example of an elastic fiber. Anything that's pretty much black on that screen is going to be an elastic fiber. And so we'll see this type of tissue in structures that need to stretch and recoil. So the walls of some of our larger arteries, we call those elastic arteries there, right? So they can compensate for the changes in blood in blood volume and blood pressure. So like the aorta, okay, brachiocephalic artery, the subclavians, okay? You'll also see it in your trachea, right? Your voice box, or actually, excuse me, the vocal cords. So you'll see this area in places that you need to have stretch and recoil. All right, so that's it for the first type of connective tissue, which is connective tissue proper. Let's talk about the second type of connective tissue, supporting connective tissue. And there's two types of supporting connective tissue, cartilage and bone. There's three types of cartilage. This is the first one, hyaline cartilage. This is the most common type. Okay, hyaline cartilage, you're going to have the predominant cell type is going to be the chondrocyte. So where this arrow is pointing to inside this red circle, that's the chondrocyte cell. That's the cell that makes the cartilage matrix, makes the collagen, okay? Helps to make the ground substance too. So in this tissue, okay, the chondrocytes will live in these chambers or these spaces. That's what you're seeing here. That's what the red line is representing. So that space or chamber is called the lacuna. So it's really important when you're taking this lab exam, all right, there's not that many words on these slides. Usually it'll just have an arrow pointing to something, and you have to name what it is. But if it's pointing to something, for example, like this slide, and you see on the slide it says space, then what the question is asking for is name the space or the chamber. Don't name what's inside the space, which is the chondrocyte. I'll see this question so many times. It'll be pointing something like this, and it'll say space, and then somebody will be like chondrocyte. And I'm like, good try, okay, but it didn't want chondrocyte. It wanted the name of the space that the chondrocyte lives in, and that's going to be the lacuna. So hyaline cartilage, again, very, very common, all right, cartilage, so you'll see it in the nose, the trachea, the larynx, the costal cartilage, which is our rib cartilage. We'll see it at the ends of our long bones there, and then in the fetal skeleton. Here is the elastic cartilage. The elastic cartilage, you'll see it, the chondrocytes are tightly packed. They're close together, one another. Hyaline, not so much. Okay, they're not far, but they're not as tightly packed. In elastic cartilage, they are. So here is, again, a chondrocyte. And that chondrocyte lives inside of that lacuna there. That lacuna is that black, green dashed line there. Again, space or chamber. And then you've got your elastic fibers, right? Those black lines right here. And we'll find the elastic cartilage in the ear, or the pinna, or the auricle, and the epiglottis. And then the last type of cartilage is the fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is very densely packed, a lot of collagen, very little ground substance. And in fact, you'll notice these black lines here, these are the chondrocytes. They're all lined up. Okay, so that's how densely packed this is. It's almost like layers here. Very little ground substance, very little white here. Now, those first two cartilages I was showing you, the hyaline cartilage, the elastic cartilage, they have a coating to them, which is called the perichondrium. Fibrocartilage does not. It does not have a perichondrium. It's found in 3 places in the body. In your spine, where the intervertebral discs are, in the pubic symphysis, where your 2 hip bones come together in front of you, just below the belly button, and then in the menisci, shock absorbers of the knee. And then our other type of supporting connective tissue is bone. And there's 2 types of bone, compact bone and spongy bone. This is a picture of the compact bone. All right, so at the center here, well, I'll go through this here with you in a second. The cells that make bone are called osteoblasts. All right, we also have osteocytes, which are these cells that live in these little black spaces here. So this circular-like structure, if you notice, it looks like tree rings here. All right, so this circular tree ring-like structure, we call that the osteon. All right, that's the basic structural unit of compact bone. Chapter 7, we'll get into detail on that. Then you'll notice in those little black spots there on our slide, the arrows are pointing to the inside of them. They're highlighted or outlined by the red dashed lines. And so those arrows are pointing to the osteocytes. Those are the cells that live in those black spaces, and they maintain the bone, take care of it, upkeep it. And then the arrows are now pointing to the red dashed lines, and those again are lacuna, the spaces there. Yes, Morgan, the answer is yes, they are in color. And then at the center of our osteon is this structure called the central canal. That's a space, people, nothing else. You have blood vessels and nerves that live inside this space. Do not put nucleus. This is not a nucleus. This black circle or this black structure is a space. And then the layers of our osteon, we call those lamellae. All right. So like your tree, you ever seen a tree cut in half, you know, it has layers there. Okay. This is very similar. And these lamellae, those are the rings that surround the central canal. So you have one here, and then you got another one here, and it just keeps going out and out. Okay. And then you'll notice, all right, from the lacuna, these little black lines here. Here's some, these are some good ones here, here. All right, those are called cannuliculi. Cannuliculi. And that's a way for these osteocytes to communicate with one another. It's like prisoners in jail. Okay, if you're in your jail cell, how do they communicate with one another? There's different ways. Okay, they'll pass things to each other through the bars or whatever. Okay, so these cannuliculi are just a way for the osteocytes to communicate with one another. So we'll find compact bone in, obviously, the bones of our body. All right, here's our fluid connective tissue right here. Okay, this is the last of the different types of connective tissue. This is a picture of our fluid connective tissue. All right, let's stop here for a moment. I want to finish up the lecture portion of wait a minute. Wait a minute. Give me 1 second. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. Oh, no, wait. I don't know. I have two of them. Okay. All right. My brain's back up and running. I'll be that way. All right. Let's finish up. The lab lecture portion of this chapter, and then we'll finish up with the labeling. Okay. So when we get to the third type of tissue in our body, right? We've already covered epithelial, and we've covered connective tissue. And we just did connective tissue last class. Today, we're going to talk about muscle and nervous tissue. So when we talk about muscle, there's 3 types of muscle tissue. Okay, the 3 types of muscle tissue are going to be skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Those are the 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. So here's a picture of the skeletal muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue, the cells are long and cylindrical, and in some cases, one single cell can be as long as the muscle itself. And you've got some muscles in your body, depending on how tall you are, that could be up to a foot long. So you can have a single cell be as long as a foot. All right. So they're parallel to one another. They do not branch. Skeletal muscles do not branch. They have striations. That means it has these stripes here. There's many nuclei that you will see in one cell. So we call it multinucleated. And skeletal muscle is under voluntary control. You can voluntarily control this. So if I want to bend my elbow, I make myself bend my elbow. Okay, so its job pretty much is movement. Move the skeleton so you can walk or you can put some food in your mouth. Right? But also we do see where it plays a role, right? When we were talking about the negative feedback system, we saw that when you got really cold, what did your body do? You would start to shiver. So it plays a role in thermal regulation. And we'll see this muscle tissue all over the body. Okay, the second type is called, all right, cardiac. Cardiac muscle tissue, all right, will not be long and cylindrical. In fact, cardiac muscle tissue branches. So I tell folks, to me, it looks like a Y on its side because it branches. So you'll have one cell branch here and here. It's also striated, similar to skeletal muscle in the fact that it was striated, and cardiac muscle tissue can have more than one nuclei. It can have one or two nuclei per cell. And if you'll notice here on our slide, you have these dark lines right here, here and here and here. All right, those are called intercalated discs. And those are sites of attachment between cells. Okay, and it allows for the cells to function as one and contract more effectively. When you get into chapter 19 and talk about the cardiac system or the heart, you'll get into more detail. But these intercalated discs allow for the movement of ions from one cell to the next, but they also create a physical anchoring point for adjacent cells, so you can have a much more efficient contraction. Now, the cardiac muscle is not under voluntary control, it's involuntary. You cannot control it with your conscious brain. You can't. I can't make my cardiac muscle beat faster sitting here. My resting heart rate is 52. I can't be like, just for the heck of it, I want it to be, 75 right now. I can't do it. So its job is to move blood through the cardiovascular system, and it's only found in one place, in the middle layer of your heart. It's called the myocardium. All right, the middle layer. The last type of muscle tissue in your body is smooth muscle. We call it smooth muscle because it is not striated, so it looks smooth. This too is under involuntary control. You cannot control this. Okay, these are short cells. They almost kind of look like a funky football here, similar to the fibroblasts, kind of fat in the middle and then thin at the end or tapered at the end. Okay, each of these muscle cells have one single nucleus. And so their job, like muscle, is to move things. Well, smooth muscle is going to be found in a lot of your internal organs, the walls of blood vessels, all right, small intestine, stomach, whatever. All right, you're going to find it in a lot of these internal organs. All right, so in certain situations, it's going to help to move materials, all right, through the organ. All right, so again, you'll see more on this in later chapters. So that is muscle tissue. The last type of tissue is nervous tissue. And there's only 3 places in the body in which you find the nervous tissue: brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Easy. That's it. The first two, these two structures, make up the central nervous system. CNS. Okay? Brain and spinal cord, central nervous system. So that's where you'll find nervous tissue. Okay, so it's made up of some cells here. The first type of cell is called the neuron. This is the rock star of the nervous system. Okay, its job is going to be to receive and transmit nerve impulses, action potentials, nerve signals, whatever you want to call it. All right, but they're going to transmit, will receive impulses from maybe another nerve, transmit impulses, and at times even process what these nerve impulses are. Right? And so that's their job. So the neuron is like the superstar, and then the glial cells are going to be like the entourage, the support staff. You have more glial cells than you do neurons in your body. But this is important. They do not transmit the nerve signals. But instead, they do everything else. They're going to protect the neurons. They're going to nourish the neurons, okay? And they'll support the neurons. And even in some situations, if a neuron becomes damaged and dies, glial cells will fill the space up in which that neuron used to exist in. All right, so when we get into the nervous system, we'll talk more about all that, okay? But for right now, just know that the glial cells are like the support cell. So here you can see a picture of a neuron, and then it's got a couple glial cells, all right, in close proximity. So the neuron's an interesting looking cell. Okay, you've got this big like bulbous end here with this long process coming off. And then you have all these little smaller, like little arms coming off. And we'll get down, we'll talk about the different parts of a neuron. And then these smaller guys that are close by, these are the glial cells, those support cells. So this is the cell that transmits the information, processes it, receives the information, and then these cells just take care of them. Okay, it's important. Okay, I like it. All right, let's finish up with some labeling, and then we'll call it a night. Okay, so back to your lab atlas. Here's the first type of muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue. I love this slide. It's a really nice one. You can see all the different striations here, alternating light and dark areas. These little dots here, all right, or specks, these are all the nuclei. This is one cell. So you can see it's multinucleated, and it's long and cylindrical. It does not branch. Okay, there are the nuclei. Here are the striations. Okay, we're going to find this tissue throughout our skeletal muscles. All right, the second type of muscle tissue is cardiac. Now that's similar because we do see some striations here, and then you have these big dark lines. Those are the intercalated discs. But you can see where the cells will branch. Here's the cell, then whoops, it splits this way, splits that way. Okay, this cell splits this way, goes down here. Okay, so cardiac muscle cells, their cells will branch out. All right, one single cell can have up to 2 nuclei, 1 or 2 nuclei. It has these striations and it has these darker lines. Those are called the intercalated discs. So there are striations. Here are the intercalated discs. All right, then a couple nuclei. And of course, we'll find this in the middle layer or the heart wall called the myocardium. And then finally, our smooth muscle tissue. Again, smooth muscle It has no striations. The cells have one single individual nuclei. And you can see how the cell is kind of thicker in the middle, and then it tapers down to the side, on either side. So again, we're going to see this type of tissue in a lot of the internal organs of your body. And its job is to move materials through the organs. And then finally, our nervous tissue. This is the last type of tissue in the body. You can see these structures here. Here are the neurons. It's got these spindly processes coming off, and then it'll have one big process coming off. That's called the axon. And again, we'll get into that later on. And then you can see here the glial cells. Glial cell, glial cell, glial cell. They're the neurons. And where do we find this tissue? Brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Brain and spinal cord, central nervous system. Know that. Booyah. Okay. Do y'all have any questions for me?